So it is Tuesday, September 27th, 2022, and I'm call this Finance and Economic Development Committee meeting to order. We have a 2-item agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
Move to approve the agenda.
I'll second it. Any discussion, any additions? All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the motion carries. We have an agenda. And first up is our 2023 revenue and expenditure estimates. Troy.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me just give me a moment to get my PowerPoint started. All right, so this is really the first part of the public process for the budget. So we are required to come before the council and give preliminary estimates for both revenues and expenditures within certain date parameters. So that is the reason we're here before you. And of course, we want transparency and to communicate the budget early and often. So thank you for the opportunity. So I will give some kind of high level estimates on where we're at with the budget. I will focus primarily on the general fund. But we're still in the process of balancing the budget. Final decisions are still being made as to what will be put in the proposed budget that you will see later in October, but certainly want to share what we have with you. So I will go ahead and get started. All right, so each year, usually in the May timeframe, the city manager and I put together a budget message for the organization that really sets the tone for the budget. June seems like a lifetime ago with what's been happening in the economy, in the world. But I think what is consistent is it's a little bit hard to tell where things are going to go. There's a lot of different things influencing what's happening. Inflation, jobs reports, geopolitical issues such as the war in Ukraine, supply issues, rising interest rates. That's all to say it's making, putting the budget together a little bit difficult. It's hard to predict what revenues may be next year, let alone even next month. So that's really kind of the landscape we're in, is just kind of constant change, new information, just kind of a shaky environment for us. And on top of all of that, we have the Federal Reserve that is purposely trying to slow down the economy. And they have continued and had a consistent message of that very thing. They are going to continue to try to slow down the economy. The main goal for the Federal Reserve is to bring down inflation rates. They do understand and have stated publicly that that may mean higher unemployment. So in other words, they plan on bringing the workforce down, which will bring wages down, which will hopefully bring prices down. So there are a lot of things happening right now in the economy that we're trying to navigate. So let's jump into revenue estimates. Sales tax, number one source of revenue for the general fund. It's about 25 to 27% of total general fund revenues. The 2023 projection as we stand is about $15.8 million. This is about 1.5 higher than the adopted 2022 budget. I will point out in 2021, we collected $15.6 million in sales tax. So we definitely have an increase in terms of the projection. As you know, this is one of the most volatile areas of our revenues. I mean, all those things we just talked about in terms of what's happening in the economy and the actions of the Federal Reserve. This is definitely one of the areas that we're watching very closely for those types of impacts.
So do you think that if the Fed's plan works, I mean, obviously if the Fed plan works, it's going to affect these numbers. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if the Fed strategy is the best. I don't know if you're going to, cut from 4.1 to 2, with this strategy. But let's say, for example, that does happen and wages come down and I mean, I guess this number reflects the increase in the cost of goods or the retail value of goods worldwide, or at least in this community. So, we've received an increase in proportion to the cost or the increase, the inflation increase, right? So it's increased our numbers, in this case, $1.5 million. If prices go back to what they were pre-pandemic, right, meaning all supply chains have been restored, all of the people who inflated their prices because they had to decrease their prices, which doesn't seem likely to me. I mean, if the public has agreed to pay 40% more, why should I lower my price? It becomes the question, unless somebody undercuts me and I'm forced to lower my price, which is not going to happen overnight, and is not, in my opinion, going to happen by increasing the interest rates, throwing a 3/4 on every 2 months. I just don't see how that's going to happen. So is it likely that this number, should all those things happen, should the Fed succeed in their plan, do you foresee this number going back to its prior level? Is that what you're saying?
Well, let me start by saying, I've told this committee before, I'm better at telling you what happened than what's going to happen. So
Yeah.
But I'll say a couple of things about our tax base. A lot of our sales tax base is what I would call non-discretionary. I mean, we don't have a big mall. We don't have an auto mall. So I think our tax base is less volatile than many other cities. So I think that, there is some strength and some consistency with our tax base. Also in this number is a high level of new construction. So we have multiple multifamily construction projects happening now. We have a lot of activity that's happening out in Northeast Lacey. We see that continuing for the short term, for sure. The areas that we've seen a lot of increase have already started to regress. I think some of that is pent-up demand from last year. We had a lot of stimulus dollars still in the economy last year. So I think those things have already occurred in terms of some of the decreases we've seen within the tax base. In fact, the mayor and I were just exchanging some emails last week about the retail base, and we've already seen a little bit of regression in the overall retail sales. I mean, the sale of goods. So I'm not talking about services necessarily. So some of that's already happening, and we're still seeing sales tax growing. I mean, by a much smaller percentage than it was, but it's still moving upwards. So I feel confident about the number, at least in the short term. I don't think anybody expects inflation is going to be under control in the next 2-3 months. So it's going to take some time. So I think 2023 will be the transition year.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to some of the comments about potential recession, most economists think it'll happen in 2023 and later in 2023. So we have time to pivot and adapt if the number does change. But certainly in the short term, I feel confident, and I think I have a long record of being conservative. So I feel pretty good about this number in 2023.
Yeah, we're insulated a little bit because of some of the construction projects, because of we have a lot of buy what you need, places here. I don't know if we have a lot of places to spend disposable income, as well as, some other cities do. But we probably could use a couple of those places as well to capture some of those extra dollars that we're not getting. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and what I was talking about with Troy is that what seems different this time around is that wages, even though it hasn't completely kept up with inflation, wages have rose quite a bit. And so it's, people are still spending money, maybe not at the same level as it was when, during, the government giveaway frenzy that we had. But for the most part, it's been amazing to actually watch and see how little to the degree that this inflation is causing people to pull back. I mean, I just got back from Las Vegas for a friend's birthday party, and you would think during this time, right, it would have been, you know, inflation's going way up, everything. I mean, it was packed. And so obviously inflation hasn't gotten to a point where people are really pulling back like we have seen in other times of uncertainty. And so, and that really has a lot to do, I think, with people's wages have gone up, and they had a bunch of savings during the pandemic as well, and they haven't burnt through all those savings quite yet. So I think that's where we're at. And the other thing I talked to Troy about is, you know, I have a retail business. I've seen all my costs go up, but I haven't passed that along to my customer. The only time that happens is on really like retail hard goods, like, you know, lumber, and where it's immediately passed along to the customer. But that's not in every single industry that happens. It happens in some things, you know, in the restaurant business, you know, your food goes up. It still lags behind. You don't necessarily immediately change your prices, but you know, that's where I think we're at, and that's where I'm feeling better so far. I'm not panicking yet on sales tax, because I still feel like we have a little bit of a buffer of people's spending habits right now.
It's interesting. I was at a finance officers conference a couple weeks ago, and all of the, you know, the financial experts I talked to, I mean, they're as kind of confused as we are. And, you know, I think one of the themes is, you know, good news is bad news and bad news is good news. It's just hard to tell which way is up. And an interesting thing, you know, kind of piggybacking on the mayor's comment, you know, one of the things that's actually good right now in the economy is that wages aren't growing faster than inflation, which seems counterintuitive. You'd want wages to keep up with inflation, right? You think for a healthy economy, that would actually be a bad thing. That would actually go feed directly into what the mayor was saying in terms of the lack of ability to pass on those costs into the consumer prices. So again, it's just kind of a weird place to be logically, but you think you know what's happening, and nope, it's completely the opposite. So but yeah, I mean, that's indicative of what we're trying to decipher as we look at numbers. So continuing with the sales tax, kind of mentioned it in the response to Deputy Mayor. Most categories have recovered from the pandemic restrictions and those reduced sales levels. And we're seeing some categories that are beginning to regress. You know, some of it I think is, you know, the stimulus dollars are no longer in the economy. I think the pent-up demand has been satisfied. I also think that, you know, as people are coming out of the pandemic, their shopping habits may have gone back to what it was before. People are actually leaving Lacey and going to other places. So I think there's a lot of things that we're seeing already that has been a return to pre-pandemic practices.
And all that being said, we're still projecting the highest sales tax revenue collection in the history of our city.
Correct. Like I said, up is down and down is up. It's kind of counterintuitive, everything we're looking at. So, you know, and I think we'll continue to watch, you know, as we look at our comparisons from 2022 and to 2021, I think we're going to continue to see that some level of regression in certain categories as we finish out the year. You know, at this point, we've only received sales taxes through July, essentially. So we still have 5 more months. If you think about what happened last summer, I think last June is when all the restrictions in terms of capacity within buildings, the masking requirements ended at about the middle of June last year. So I think we're going to continue to see that trend for the second half of this year in terms of kind of that difference of what we would expect to see in those comparisons.
Well, I'll let you know right now, your August numbers are going to look really good.
It's good.
Yep.
Property tax, another significant source of revenue for the general fund. We're projecting just under 8.5 million. This is an increase of about 447,000. Really good news in terms of valuation. We're adding 416 million. This number will change probably 5 or 6 times before the council actually adopts the property tax for next year, but it's going to be, very close to that number. About 210 million from new construction. So again, lots of construction activity happening in Lacey, which, about a year later ends up on our property tax rolls and ends up being new property tax. The impacts of annexation continue to impact on property tax. We're adding 206 million from annexation this year.
I had a question about those two numbers. So the 206.1 million in annexation, is that assessed value or is that?
Yes, assessed value.
So then the other one, the 209, that is projected assessed value or that is actual, or that is projected retail value?
That's assessed value as well. So as construction progresses, the county assessor evaluates. I believe they use, the same approach they do for existing property in terms of what that valuation is. So that will be the tax base, what goes into the tax system.
So that number represents an as completed?
No, I believe that it is as construction occurs.
Okay,
so even a project that isn't complete ends up in that number.
Okay.
Yeah. Another great thing about that 209 million new construction is there's also a lot of other one-time dollars that we get from it that we don't get from annexation, right? There's all the retail expenditures that go along with that new construction, and of course all the permit side of it as well. That's the big difference between the new construction and the annexation. Annexation, you are receiving the valuation, but you're not receiving all the other one-time dollars you get from new construction.
That's correct. And it'll result in additional utility tax as those properties become occupied. So, there's a lot at stake when it comes to new construction.
The free frontage, all the things that the contractor has to do.
All the improvements, yeah.
All the improvements, yeah.
As always, we'll ask the council to consider the 1%, use the 1% authority. Just as reference, the course of limitation is 1% or the implicit price inflator, whichever is less. No surprise, implicit price inflator is going to be high. The limitation is based on Q3, and Q3 hasn't ended yet, so we don't know that number, but Q2 is 9%. I don't expect that Q3 is going to be much different than that. So
this number represents the amount that we are able to add to the property taxes.
Right. So
I remember if I calculated this number out, it came out to like 4 basis points, somewhere in that ballpark, because we're only adding a portion to our portion, which is a very small portion.
It is. So it's about $80,000.
Okay.
In terms of increase.
The last time was 77.
And it's, that $80,000 then gets spread out between all the assessed value. So it's, yeah.
It ends up probably $1 per $100,000, something like that. So it's not a huge increase. In terms of what we're seeing in assessed valuation, we're going to be around 12.6 billion. Last year, or actually this year, we're at 9 billion.
Yeah.
That's a 34% increase. The mayor and I were.
Have you ever seen an increase that big before?
No, that's by far the largest thing. I thought we've seen it in the teens here the last couple of years, and I thought that was kind of unprecedented. So yeah, 34% is historic. At this year's employee barbecue, I sat with the mayor for a while and we talked about property tax and assessed valuations, and the mayor joked that, what is the levy rate going to be, 50 cents? And I scoffed, of course, and
Yeah.
It's probably gonna drop below 70 cents, so, you know, the mayor
See?
was much closer than I thought. it would be. So,
Told you.
yeah, so that was, I think, yeah, we'll see some pretty low levy rates this year when we get the final numbers. Some of the other
Yeah.
revenues,
And yet people still do not understand it. You know, that's what's so crazy about property taxes is people do not understand the collection of property taxes and compared to assessed value, right? They see their assessed value go way, way up and they're like, oh my, you know, they think they're going to get taxed on that full amount. And that's not how every taxing authority, you know, sees that number. But anyway.
yeah, we'll have to be more, you know, aware of that as we go into our public meetings. I think the assessor did a really good job in terms of the message that was sent from that office in terms of what people are getting in terms of their assessed valuation. Of course, you know, there's the opportunity for panic when you see those large increases, but that doesn't mean that taxes are going to increase by the same amount. So, but you know, we should definitely get a little more education out there this year just because of that. Some of our other major categories, utility tax, projecting about 8.9 million. It's an increase of about 1.3 million. This is all trend analysis. As you know, it's really based on consumption. So weather will impact these numbers greatly. You know, if we have a long cold winter, that's going to bring in more, you know, utility tax from natural gas, electricity, that sort of thing. If we have a long dry summer, that's going to have more water sales, which is going to drive that number up. And just the opposite, if we have mild winter, you know, we're going to see these revenues decrease. B&O tax, business and occupation tax, projecting about 3.1 million. Basically use the same basis as sales tax, so significant growth within this area as well. Admissions tax, this is an interesting one to watch. We're projecting about 168,000. This is a decrease of about 85,000 from the pre-pandemic numbers. This is just an area of the economy that has not come back. I think
Can you explain admissions tax? Admission to what?
anytime a consumer pays admission to like a sporting event, movie theater, a play, that type of activity, there's an admission tax of 5% for us. So it's a lot of times it's just built into the price of the ticket. So when you go to the movie theater, you pay your $10 to get in, it's included in that.
Because we don't have a whole lot of places that you pay admission to get into.
That's correct.
I mean, we have a movie theater. Okay.
So, but I mean, this is an area I think that, you know, might have changed permanently due to the pandemic. Think about streaming and the ability to get movies pretty quickly at home. I think it's probably changed, you know, behavior. So we'll watch this one closely as we go forward too.
Although there are a bunch of good movies coming out next in 2023, so that might change things too.
Well, we saw a slowdown to the new releases too, to the mayor's point.
Yeah.
So it's been slow. Gambling tax, good news here. We're actually seeing gambling tax at a higher level than pre-pandemic right now. So that's reflected in a slight increase in a projection to gambling tax. So not a great deal, but certainly an area that's come back. Parks and recreation fees. This is an area that's still not quite back to normal. We're basically using the same revenue projections as pre-pandemic levels. I think we'll get close in 2022. I mean, back, you know, close to normal. You can see in 2021, we only collected about 320,000 revenues from Parks and Rec. So, but I think we've come a long ways. Investment income, you know, this is really actions of the Federal Reserve that's impacting this. A 274% increase to investment income. If you think about where we were in January, the overnight rate was at the top end was 0.25%. We're at I think 3.25 now, maybe 3.5. So that's what, a 1,500% increase, give or take. One of the issues we have is, our longer term investments are going to take a little bit longer to turn over. So it's going to take us a little bit to get there, but certainly significant increases to interest revenues. The utility rates, we plan to propose single year increases for 2023. We do have an adopted stormwater comp plan that calls for 4.5% annual increases through 2025. We have a draft water comp plan that calls for 5.25% annual increases through 2027. We're just starting the wastewater comp plan, but in conjunction with the water rate or the water comp plan, we asked our consultants to look at a multi-year sewer rate as well. And that increases 9.5% through 2027. And, the council, was involved in a lot of that discussion last year. So these are consistent with the rate increases for 2022. And like I said, consistent with what the plans are going to call for the long term.
Troy, can you remind me, do we have any programs out there for, say, people who are low income or seniors who are on a fixed low income? Do we give any sort of breaks for people in those categories?
We do. We have two different discounts. We have a low income senior discount and a low income disabled discount. And I want to say it's 50%. Don't quite quote me on that, but there are discounts that folks can apply to. You can do that at our utility billing division. We have an application process and income verification process, but that is certainly available for folks.
I think that's something that we need to continue to talk a little bit about. I don't think the average person is necessarily aware of that. And so, because if you're on a fixed income, you add up these rate increases, it's, unless you're doing something on your consumption side, this can be a major impact to your budget. So I think we need to continue to talk about those programs and make sure that the public knows that they're available for people who are on a fixed income.
Are those programs across the utility spectrum, or is it just for one? Is it just water, just sewer, or?
It's for the city's rates. So all three of these, we also collect on behalf of lot, and for your information, lot's increase is going to be 3%. I'd have to look. I'm not positive that discount applies to lot. I don't believe it does, but certainly, water, sewer, stormwater. So let's switch to the expenditures side of the budget. Really going to kind of stay high level here because there's a lot of assumptions that we're still kind of navigating through. Salaries is, as is about 2/3 of the general fund budget. Our two largest labor groups are unsettled for 2022, let alone 2023. So that's the reason we're not exactly sure where we're going to land. But just to give some reference, for the general fund, if we look at 2022 salaries, 1% is equal to 243,000. Doing the same thing for benefits, 1% is equal to 89,000. So that's kind of the number we're, thinking about in terms of potential impacts for the budget. I'm looking citywide, so that would bring in our utilities, our internal service funds, such as IT and equipment rental, using the same kind of basis. 1% is 315,000, and then benefits is 121,000 per every 1% of increase. To kind of give you an historic perspective of our contracts, the ASME contract, which is our biggest labor group. Like I said, we're still not under contract for 2022, but the the 2021 increase was 90% of inflation. Looking at the Police Officers Guild, which is our second biggest contract, it expired also in 2021. And their 2021 increase was 100% of inflation plus 0.5%.
Do we have any idea when we're gonna get those contracts signed?
I do not. I think we're close on one. The Police Management Association contract, we're under contract through this year. This year's increase, 2022 increase was 2%. And then the Senior Management Association within police for this year was 90% of inflation. To give you a sense of where employee benefits are headed, we purchase on behalf of our employees most of the benefits through the AWC Benefit Trust. This is not one of those. So PERS is our retirement contribution for the majority of our employees. Slight increase has actually already occurred for 2022, which will carry us through at least the first half of 2023. Just a slight increase, 0.14%. So going from 10.25 to 10.39. Regents, which is medical insurance, the increase is going to be between 3 and 6%. Kaiser Permanente is increased projection is 4 to 7%. Dental for Washington or for Delta Dental, it's 0 to 2%. For Willamette Dental, it's going to be 0 to 4%. Vision, no change projected. The labor and industries rates just were announced this week. There's going to be an overall increase of 4.8%. And then what happens is, depending on your classification of employees, you have different multiplier factors. So if you look at some of the significant work groups that we have and the increases, so within the city, police is going up 14%, administration 7%, and public works and parks employees up 7%. So we're going to see a pretty decent increase within our labor and industries insurance. Luckily, the numbers are fairly small when you kind of look at the overall benefit package. We will know the final rates, I think Thursday. So the AWC Benefit Trust Board is set to vote this week. So the majority of the medical, dental, vision will know for sure here this week.
I'm surprised administration's up so much, considering there's not a lot of opportunities for people to get hurt, sitting at a desk for the most part. But that's interesting. The other quick question I had is, how does the city pay the PERS contribution? What is that 10% or 10.39% of what?
That is of gross salaries.
So gross salaries, 10% of the gross salaries is going into PERS.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
This is a quick list of some significant budget initiatives that are being considered to be included in the proposed budget. We have vehicle and equipment replacements, kind of standard from year to year. We're looking at replacing the Woodland Creek Park Bridge. This has been something we've been watching for a number of years. There are street department vehicles and equipment being looked at, various building repair projects. Within the utilities, again, significant capital improvement programs, 18.4 in water, 12.5 in sewer, and 1.1 million in stormwater. In terms of transportation, total 18.1 million, that does include the Transportation Benefit District projects. I will point out that we're going to be proposing a $7.5 million overlay program, so a significant program we've never done relate to that level. You might remember about 4 or 5 years ago, we did the Super T project down there at the Yelm and College area. That was right around $4, maybe $5 million. So this will be a significant program this year. Also included in that, in transportation benefit district is $500,000 for sidewalk repairs. So
Is that all coming from transportation benefit district?
it is. So we have, we've been building up reserves and we're going to spend them.
Yeah.
So
Did we originally project that at what, 2 million a year, under 2 million a year?
I think it was like 1.8, Mr. Mayor. So, and we're collecting in the $3 million range currently. So, in terms of workforce areas that we're considering, these are the areas that we hope to address. So communications, the housing action plan, environmental sustainability, law enforcement, social services, and climate mitigation. So, you know, when Scott returns, we'll put some final decision on this, but these will be the focus areas, I believe, in terms of where we're going to be adding workforce. So kind of thinking about, you know, the big picture for the budget. You know, we do have a lot of uncertainty looking forward. You know, we want to be cautious. So we're trying to be conservative in terms of taking on new initiatives. You know, you heard me talk about during the budget amendment process for sure, and in the mid-year report. You know, we want to, 2023 is going to need to be a catch-up year. I mean, many projects were delayed. You've heard time and time again about the supply chain issues. There are very few capital improvement projects that haven't been delayed. Some of those aren't even going to occur in 2022. I think everything except for asphalt and concrete has been delayed, whether it be paint, iron, I mean, just anything out there seems to be delayed. Vehicles is another area that's been, you know, very impacted by the supply chain. I'm not sure we're going to receive a single vehicle replacement in 2022. So those will all be carried over as well. That all means more work for staff because we didn't accomplish what we intended to accomplish this year. So in some cases, we're going to have, you know, significant increases to workload next year just to keep up, or to catch up. So let's talk about the balancing effort. Before we even started the budget process, taking projected revenues versus kind of the normal inflationary increases for expenditures, it was looking like a $1 million deficit. So that's where we started. And like I said, before we even considered department requests. We are anticipating the use of one-time reserves. And, you know, the council knows that we have a lot of identified reserves for capital projects. We even have reserves for ongoing operations and maintenance expenditures. It's why we have reserves. It's why we plan for reserves. It's for times of uncertainty, times of economic downturns. This is the time to use them.
So how much are we carrying over from reserves estimated for 2022?
I haven't projected that yet, but it's, you know, given the sales tax level, it's probably, you know, in the $1 to $2 million range. We also have lots of vacancies in terms of our workforce. So yeah, I think, you know, once 2022 ends, we'll have more reserves to identify in terms of what the council priorities are.
It's always an interesting budget discussion. One of the biggest differences between, you know, budgets on the government side and budgets on the private sector side, you know, we carry over those those extra dollars that goes into the next year and it becomes part of our budget, right? And so if you carry over 2 million and you project a $1.5 million, you know, decrease, where overall you're still up 500,000. But in this way we budget, we don't do it that way. And so it's an interesting, you know, it's hard, sometimes hard to wrap your head around.
I mean, it's really it's conservatism in action, right? So, you know, one thing to think about is we have for the last 18 months, we've had right around 30 vacancies.
Yeah.
It's just been consistent around 30. And if you just take $100,000 for salaries and benefits times 30, that's $3 million. So if we were fully staffed, and we want to be fully staffed, that is the goal, we wouldn't be talking about $2 million in excess reserves. But as we know, it doesn't matter what's happening in the world, we always have turnover. But we budget and we obligate monies for being fully staffed because, we want to be able to say we have budget to pay all employees at all times. So yeah, it is a different mindset for sure.
Yeah.
Looking at, kind of digging down into the details of our reserves, I do want to remind the committee that in terms of reserves that the council has committed for ongoing operations and maintenance, we have $2 million in succession planning for the police department. We know that we're going to continue to see turnover in the police department, and we want to plan for that. There's a long lead time, as you know, for new officers to go through the academy. So we want to be ahead of that curve if we can. The council also committed reserves to help subsidize the RAC operations. We do need to put together a long-term financial plan. We need to make determinations about, what is the general fund support long-term going to be for the RAC. So there is $600,000 in a reserve for that. As a reminder, we plan to use about $200,000 per year. So we have, 3 years of reserve to keep the RAC going. We also identified about $250,000 for the mobile outreach team for social services, much needed program. So we do have monies for that program going forward. And like I said, we have a number of reserves for capital replacements. So we certainly plan on identifying those reserves in the proposed budget as well. So looking forward, some of the big questions, revenues, and we talked a lot about the economy and the uncertainty. So we'll be watching that closely. On the expenditure side, it's going to much of it's going to be all about labor. Again, 2/3 of our general fund expenditures are coming from labor. Inflation is certainly going to be an uncertainty going forward. And then the labor and supply challenges, these are all going to be things we're watching very closely. So as we stand today, these are the reserves we're planning on including in the proposed budget. We'll get the budget hopefully balanced this week, but some of that will be from a budget policy reserve that the council identified, I think 5 years ago during the 6-year planning process. So I think that's how we'll get there. Like I said, we will be using reserves to balance the budget, but that's precisely why we have them, for those to kind of even out the economic cycles. So that is the preview of the budget. So any questions, any further questions?
Yeah, that reserve amount is $100,000 less than our additional tax collection, barely.
Yep. Nope. I don't have any questions. So let's go on to the credit card policy.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. So for your consideration today is an update. Well, actually, we're requesting that you move to the full council a proposal to update the credit card policy. The council did adopt a new policy back in February 2020. We were on track to fully implement a credit card program for the organization, and then 2 weeks later, COVID hit. I think the council adopted a policy February 27th or 25th of 2020. So we haven't fully implemented the program yet.
Right.
We've picked that back up. And one of the things we would like to do is we'd like to follow the example of the council, and actually the mayor, I think, was, the main reason behind expansion of credit cards to the council for travel. We would like to follow that and allow employees to use city issued credit cards to individuals and have those individuals use credit cards for travel purposes. The issue we have is we have a $1,000 transaction limit in the current policy, and by our best estimate, we need a higher limit to accommodate that. So we're proposing a $2,500 transaction limit to accommodate that expansion. I'd also say that I think inflationary numbers are impacting, a need for a higher limit for those small purchases, which is what the credit card is intended to be. So the proposal is pretty limited. There's two different transaction limits we'd like the council to consider. Again, raising the transaction limit, the maximum transaction limit from 1,000 to 2,500. We'd also like the council to consider increasing the minor equipment purchase limit from 500 to 1,000. That would be more consistent with our capital asset policy, as well as, just inflationary costs of, small equipment purchases rising. And there are a whole number of housekeeping changes within the policy. I think you could see that in the red line version there within the packet, but mostly wordsmithing, but also including some, I think, clear direction in terms of, anticipation of internal controls and other requirements. So again, housekeeping changes. So we would, ask the committee to move that on to full council for consideration. So,
Is this gonna? Go ahead.
Before we make that recommendation, looking at the increases for the transactions, shouldn't we maybe think about putting an inflation number in there every year? I mean, it seems like we're gonna have to come back in another year and 2 years and say, well, geez, that $2,500 limit is no longer feasible. Or, I mean, I don't know. It seems like we should have a bet, at least on the minor equipment side. Maybe travel so unpredictable where costs go with travel, but I think maybe we should think of long term and maybe have an inflation number in there, just so it sort of keeps up with the times. We're not always having to come back and do this. What your thoughts are?
Yeah, that's actually a really great suggestion. However, I think what might be a good approach is to get fully implemented within the organization. And I think we'll identify I think we're going to identify other policy pressure points. This is a program that hasn't been widely used in Lacey's history. So I think it's kind of a, we don't know what we don't know situation. But I do like that, I think, in the future. So maybe I would recommend giving us a year or so to get some experience under our belts and kind of fully understand what the organization's needs. Because I do think we'll be back before the council again, in the next 12 to 18 months. And then certainly we could come forward a recommendation for some sort of inflationary, maybe a rounding up. I'd hate to see a limit of $1,243. That'd be hard to manage. Maybe we'd round up to the nearest 500 or 250 or something along that lines. But it's mostly, our experience and what we've seen so far is the average transaction limit is actually quite low. So I mean, these upper limits rarely, we rarely get close. In fact, I think our average transaction limit is probably under $200. But I mean, it's when we do run into those issues, it certainly does slow down the organization. And we do have written in the policy that the city manager does have the authority to grant exceptions on a need basis. So that might be another way to address those kind of one-time situations as well.
Yeah, and maybe some employees, their transactions are higher than others, so we can look at a subgroup, right? And that goes up, that maybe others don't. My other big question is, and I'm really, by the way, I'm happy we're doing this because it makes a lot of sense, not only from tracking everything, right? Because then the credit card receipt has, what it is, so on and so forth. But I'm also curious, is this a credit card or is this a debit card?
It'd be a credit card.
Okay, and then what is the, do we have a pretty decent rewards program associated with this?
We will, at least the direction I think we're going to go. We wanted to wait for the council to, hopefully adopt new policy before we start looking at a program, but the ones we're looking at do have pretty robust cashback programs. And, you think about your own personal use of credit cards, multiply that by a very large business operation, it will be, I think, pretty significant.
That's where I was going. I mean, we're spending these dollars anyway. We might as well, and we're going to pay it off every month. So we might as well be getting the benefits, the cashback benefits that can actually lower the cost of the city doing business. That's what the private sector does all the time. I'm glad that we're finally catching up to that. And a cashback makes the most sense, obviously, in this circumstance, I think.
Well, then with that, I would move that we forward this new credit card policy update to the full council.
And I'll second that. Is there any more discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. We'll forward this on to full council for consideration and hopefully adoption. Okay. Well, with that, we've reached the end of our agenda. Without objection.